The Wild West was full of unforgettable characters, each with a story pulled straight from a movie. There were fearless outlaws like Billy the Kid, who could outdraw any lawman, and legendary lawmen like Wyatt Earp, who faced down dangerous gangs to keep the peace. You had larger-than-life figures like Annie Oakley, a sharpshooting pioneer, and Doc Holliday, a gunslinger with a quick temper and even quicker aim. But while their stories are exciting, the truth behind their deaths is often much stranger than the myths. Get ready to saddle up as we dig into the truth behind the deaths of 21 Wild West legends. According to popular legend, Billy the Kid's death came during a daring escape from jail. The story goes that after being captured, the Kid was locked up in the Lincoln County Jail in New Mexico, but he wasn't the type of man to stay behind bars for long. Using his quick wit and fast reflexes, Billy managed to overpower his guards, break out of the jail, and make a run for freedom. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. The reality of Billy the Kid's death is far less cinematic than the popular legend. In truth, the Kid's last moments were much more subdued and far from the daring jailbreak we've come to imagine. After escaping from jail in 1881, Billy the Kid continued his life on the run, pursued relentlessly by Sheriff Pat Garrett. The two had a complicated relationship. Garrett, once a friend of Billy, had turned against him after being elected sheriff, and was determined to bring him to justice. For his part, the Kid had earned a reputation as an outlaw who was nearly impossible to catch. Finally, on July 14, 1881, Sheriff Garrett tracked Billy to a ranch near Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Billy was inside a dark room when Garrett, who had been waiting for the right moment, entered. Garrett called out, "Who's there?" Thinking it was one of his friends, Billy answered, "It's me, Billy." He was momentarily caught off guard when Garrett, standing in the doorway, fired a single shot. The bullet struck Billy in the chest, and he fell to the floor, dead. There was no dramatic shootout, no blazing gunfight. Billy's quick draw, which had saved him countless times before, wasn't quick enough this time. He was just 21 years old. Well, Bill Hickok is often remembered for being shot in the back of the head while playing poker in Deadwood, South Dakota, holding a pair of aces and eights known as the Dead Man's Hand. While this dramatic story is well known, the reality is more complex. Hickok was past his prime by his death on August 7, 1876. Once a famous lawman and gunfighter, he had settled into life in Deadwood, playing poker in a saloon. On that fateful day, he was sitting with his back to the door, which was a mistake for someone so accustomed to danger. Jack McCall, a man with a grudge, snuck into the saloon and shot Hickok in the back of the head. Hickok didn't get a chance to react, and the poker game ended with his life. Not a winning hand. Jesse James, born in 1847 in Missouri, became a notorious outlaw after the Civil War. He and his brother Frank robbed banks and stagecoaches. His gang, the James Younger Gang, was known for its daring heists and narrow escapes from the law. In 1882, Jesse lived under the alias Mr. Howard in St. Joseph, Missouri. On April 3rd, he was shot in the back of the head by Robert Ford, a member of his gang. Tired of the outlaw life, Ford saw an opportunity to earn a reward by turning in Jesse. His actions, often seen as betrayal, were more about survival and money than revenge. Afterward, Ford became widely hated for killing Jesse, and just 2 years later, he was shot and killed by Edward O'Kelly in 1884. Many viewed O'Kelly's actions as justice for Jesse's death. Doc Holliday, born in 1851 in Georgia, was a well-educated dentist who became famous for his role in the Wild West. In the 1870s, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis and moved west in search of better health. But his condition worsened. Unable to continue his dental practice, Doc turned to gambling, where he gained a reputation as a skilled poker player. He also became involved with outlaws and participated in legendary events like the gunfight at the OK Corral alongside Wyatt Earp. As his tuberculosis worsened, Doc's health declined, and by 1887 he was living in Colorado, hoping for relief. In a dramatic shootout, Doc passed away quietly from his illness in a hotel room in Glenwood Springs. His last words reportedly were, "This is funny." Wyatt Earp, born in 1848 in Illinois, became famous as a lawman in the frontier towns of Dodge City and Tombstone. He gained legendary status after the gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881, where he and his brothers, along with Doc Holliday, fought against the Clanton and McClory brothers. Following the gunfight, Earp went on a vendetta ride to revenge for his brother Morgan's death. However, Wyatt's later years were much quieter than his violent past. After leaving Tombstone, he settled in California, living in relative obscurity and trying various careers, including film consulting and business. Wyatt Earp died peacefully of natural causes in Los Angeles on January 13th, 1929, at the age of 80, far removed from the gunfights and dangers of his younger days. Annie Oakley was famous for her incredible sharpshooting skills. She performed feats like shooting cigars from her husband's mouth and hitting targets while riding a horse. She became a star in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, where audiences saw her as unbeatable. However, as she grew older, Oakley faced health issues, particularly anemia, which made it harder for her to continue her physical activities. Despite her declining health, she became a strong advocate for women's rights, encouraging women to participate in sports and activities traditionally seen as men's roles. She even offered to train women as snipers during World War I. Annie Oakley's death in 1926 was quiet, not the dramatic end many might have expected. She passed away at the age of 66 due to complications from anemia. Calamity Jane's name is often tied to stories of daring shootouts, whiskey-soaked saloons, and fierce adventures across the American frontier. She was rumored to have been a notorious outlaw, a woman who could hold her own against any man in a fight. Hollywood, books, and the stories of the time painted her as a wild, fearless character, a woman with a deadly aim and a reputation for trouble. In 1903, Calamity Jane passed away at the age of 51 from pneumonia, a disease that may have been made worse by her long battle with alcoholism. It was a sad and quiet end to the life of a woman who had once been known for her wild reputation. However, one of the most touching parts of her story is that she asked to be buried next to Wild Bill Hickok, even though the two may not have shared a romantic relationship. Perhaps it was a mark of respect or the culmination of a deep and lifelong affection for him. Regardless, she was laid to rest beside him in Deadwood, South Dakota, in a cemetery that still attracts visitors today. The most popular story of Butch Cassidy's death is that in 1908, he and the Sundance Kid fled to Bolivia, where they continued their outlaw ways. The Bolivian military eventually surrounded them, and a shootout led to their deaths. Witnesses claim to have seen their bodies, solidifying the legend of their dramatic end. However, some believe this may not be true. There is no clear evidence that they died in Bolivia. Some think they faked their deaths and escaped to live in the U.S. A man named William T. Phillips even claimed to be Butch Cassidy years later, and Cassidy's mother allegedly received letters from him after the shootout. The true fate of Butch Cassidy remains a mystery, adding to his legendary status. The Sundance Kid, born Harry Alonzo Longabaugh in 1867 in Pennsylvania, he became one of the most famous outlaws in history. Harry wasn't always an outlaw in history. Like many young men, he traveled west to find work after the Civil War. But in 1887, He got caught stealing a horse in Sundance, Wyoming. After serving 18 months in jail, he walked out with a new nickname, the Sundance Kid. He tried honest work as a cowboy for a while, but that didn't stick. By the 1890s, Sundance had joined the Wild Bunch, a group of outlaws led by the clever and charismatic Butch Cassidy. Together, they became legends for robbing banks and trains with style and skill. In 1908, Sundance and Butch allegedly met their end in Bolivia. After a payroll robbery went wrong, they were surrounded by Bolivian soldiers in the town of San Vicente. A gunfight broke out, and the story goes that Butch shot Sundance to save him from being captured, then turned the gun on himself. But here's the twist. The bodies were buried in unmarked graves, and no one has ever proven for sure that the men killed were Sundance and Butch. Sundance's death has kept historians guessing for over a century. Some believe the pair faked their deaths to escape the law and start fresh somewhere far away. There are even stories of people spotting Sundance alive years after 1908. Some say he returned quietly to the United States under a new name, while others think he stayed in South America, enjoying his freedom. In the 1990s, researchers dug up the Bolivian graves to try and confirm the bodies' identities, but DNA tests didn't provide any clear answers. The question of whether Sundance died in Bolivia remains unanswered. Born William Frederick Cody in 1846, he grew up when the American frontier was still wild and untamed. Cody wasn't one to let fame pass him by. In 1883, he launched Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a traveling show that brought the frontier to life. Imagine a circus with cowboys, Native American warriors, stagecoach robberies, and dramatic reenactments of battles. Cody even recruited real-life legends like sharpshooter Annie Oakley and Lakota leader Sitting Bull to join the show. Buffalo Bill's later years were less glamorous. The Wild West was becoming a memory, and the rise of film meant his live performances were no longer the main attraction. Financial troubles plagued him, and his once massive show began to falter. In 1917, Buffalo Bill Cody passed away at the age of 70 from kidney failure. He spent his last days in Denver, Colorado, surrounded by family and friends. Though his death was far from the dramatic shootouts he once portrayed, his legacy was already cemented. Sam Bass wasn't born an outlaw. He became one. Starting as a regular farm boy with big dreams, he eventually turns to robbing trains, stagecoaches, and banks. His bold crimes earned him a reputation as the Robin Hood of Texas. But the reality of his life wasn't as heroic as the stories made it seem. Sam's success didn't last long. After the Union Pacific train robbery, his gang started falling apart. Some members were caught, while others quit. Meanwhile, the Texas Rangers, a tough group of lawmen, were determined to bring Sam to justice. In July 1878, Sam and his remaining gang members planned to rob a bank in Round Rock, Texas. But things didn't go as planned. When they rode into town, they were spotted, and a shootout broke out before they could even get inside the bank. During the shootout, Sam was badly wounded. His gang fled, leaving him behind. The next day, the Texas Rangers found him lying in a field. Too weak to fight, Sam spent his last hours confessing to his crimes and naming his accomplices. On July 21st, 1878, at just 27 years old, Sam Bass died from his injuries. Sam Bass died from his injury. Between 1875 and 1883, Black Bart robbed at least 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California and Oregon. He became known not only for his smooth demeanor, but also for his unusual calling card, poetry. After one robbery in 1877, he left a short rhyme in the empty strongbox. His poems weren't exactly masterpieces, but they made him stand out. People couldn't decide if they hated him for stealing or admired him for being so creative. Black Bart's run of luck ended in 1883, during a failed robbery near Copperopolis, California. In his rush to escape, he dropped a handkerchief with a laundry tag on it. That tag led detectives to his door in San Francisco, where he lived under the fake name T.Z. Spaulding. Bart stayed calm when the Wells Fargo agents arrested him, and even joked with them. He admitted to the crimes, but proudly said he had never hurt anyone during his robberies. The court sentenced him to 6 years in San Quentin prison, but because he behaved so well, Bart was released after just 4 years. When Black Bart walked out of prison in 1888, he vanished completely. Before leaving, he reportedly told a Wells Fargo agent, "I'm done with crime." After that, no one knows what happened to him. Some say he moved to New York or the Midwest to live quietly with his family. Others think he may have returned to robbing stagecoaches under a new name. Some even believe he died alone, far from the spotlight. Whatever the truth, no one has ever confirmed where he went or how he died. When most people think of Geronimo, they imagine a man who fought tooth and nail until his final moment. The myth paints him as an indomitable spirit, a warrior who would never surrender to the U.S. Army, no matter how dire the circumstances. However, what most people don't know is that Geronimo's last battle wasn't fought on horseback with guns blazing, but against an illness that would end his life. Geronimo's life changed dramatically after he was captured by the U.S. Army in 1886. After years of fighting to protect his people and their land, he and his followers were forced to surrender. They were sent to a prison camp in Florida, far from their home in the Southwest. This ended Geronimo's role as a warrior, though his name still carried weight among the Apache. In 1909, when Geronimo was around 80 years old, he had a fall from his horse. This accident weakened him, and soon after, he developed pneumonia. Geronimo's health was already fragile, and he didn't recover. He passed away on February 17, 1909. His death was not from battle, but from illness. According to some accounts, Geronimo's final words showed his deep regret. He wished he had never surrendered, saying, "I should have fought, and I should have died fighting." Belle Starr was born Myra May Belle Shirley in 1848 in Missouri. She grew up in a quiet, respectable family, but her life took a turn after the Civil War. She married an outlaw named Sam Starr, and together they got involved in cattle, rustling, and horse theft. Over time, Belle became known as a tough, fearless woman who could ride and shoot just as well as any man. People started calling her the Bandit Queen because of her connection to crime. Belle Starr's life ended in 1889, but her death wasn't as exciting as many think. She was shot while riding home alone, just a few miles from a ranch in Oklahoma. The person who shot her was never found, and there were no witnesses to the crime. Since the killer was never caught, many people have tried to figure out who was responsible for Belle's death. One theory is that it was a crime of passion, perhaps connected to her relationships with men like her former lover, Jim Reed, who was known for his violent temper. Others think someone from her past, maybe a fellow outlaw or someone involved in her criminal activities, may have killed her over a deal that went wrong. Bass Reeves was an incredible man and a real-life hero of the Wild West. Born into slavery, he escaped during the Civil War and became one of the first black U.S. Marshals in the West. Reeves was known for arresting over 3,000 criminals and was famous for his skills in tracking down bad guys. His life inspired the character of the Lone Ranger, who was also known for bringing justice to outlaws in the West. But unlike the action-packed adventures we hear about in stories, Reeves didn't die in a dramatic shootout. Instead, he passed away quietly in 1910 from natural causes. Even though his death wasn't as wild as the rest of his life, it doesn't take away from the amazing work he did in making the Wild West safer for everyone. Curly Bill Brocious was one of the most feared criminals in Arizona. As the leader of the Cowboys, a group of outlaws, Curly Bill was known for his violent ways. He was involved in many crimes, including killing lawmen, which earned him a reputation as a dangerous and ruthless man. Curly Bill's death, however, was much simpler than the wild stories about him. In 1882, Wyatt Earp hunted him down during a quest for revenge. Earp and his brothers were after the Cowboys, who had killed their brother. When they came across Curly Bill, a gunfight broke out, and Curly Bill was shot and killed by Wyatt Earp. While his death wasn't the big dramatic end some expected, it was the fitting finish to a life full of crime. Kit Carson is often remembered as one of the greatest frontiersmen in history. He was a skilled scout and explorer who led expeditions through the dangerous wilderness of the West. Carson was a tough, fearless man who played a key role in mapping the American frontier and fighting in war. However, unlike many Wild West legends who died in dramatic ways, Carson's death was much quieter. After years of battling the elements and exploring the harshest places, Kit Carson passed away in 1868 from an abdominal aortic aneurysm, a condition caused by the weakening of a blood vessel. His death wasn't in the middle of a gunfight, but his legacy as one of the greatest explorers in American history lives on. Johnny Ringo's name is often spoken with awe, as if he were the very definition of a Wild West gunslinger. Known for his quick temper and faster draw, Ringo was rumored to have killed dozens of men in cold blood. With his slick black hat, stoic demeanor, and reputation for being both smart and deadly, it's no surprise that legends about him spread like wildfire. But how did Johnny Ringo meet his end? Well, it wasn't in a dramatic shootout or a face-off at high noon. Ringo's death was as mysterious as his life. In 1882, he was found dead under a tree near the town of Turkey Creek in Arizona. It appeared that Ringo had shot himself with a bullet wound to his head. Officially, the cause of death was ruled a suicide. However, rumors spread that he didn't take his own life. Many believed he was murdered. Some say he was killed by rival outlaw Wyatt Earp or by his former friend, Doc Holliday, who had personal grudges against Ringo. So, was Ringo's death a case of suicide or something more sinister? We may never know, but it's safe to say the Wild West wasn't short on mysterious deaths. Pearl Hart is one of the Wild West's most fascinating outlaws, not because she was particularly dangerous, but because she was a woman in a world dominated by men. A notorious lady bandit, Hart became infamous after she and her partner Joe Boot held up a stagecoach in Arizona in 1899. But rather than simply stealing a bag of cash, she made the robbery memorable by being one of the few women to do so, using her gender to her advantage and catching the attention of the press. The legend of Pearl Hart grew, and many imagined her to be a cold-hearted bandit, outwitting law enforcement officers and taking what she could. In reality, Hart's outlaw days were short-lived. After being caught, she was tried and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But she didn't stay there for long. Due to poor health and the fact that she was a woman, in an era when women were often treated more leniently, Hart was released after just a few years. She eventually faded from the public eye and spent the remainder of her life far away from her days as an outlaw. Pearl Hart lived quietly until she passed away in 1955, far removed from the legends that once surrounded her. John Wesley Harden was a notorious gunslinger with a colorful reputation for violence. Known for his fiery temper and deadly aim, Harden claimed that he never drew first, only shooting in self-defense or when provoked. He made his name by killing a man at the age of 15, and went on to have a series of violent run-ins with lawmen, rival outlaws, and anyone who looked at him the wrong way. To many, he symbolized the dangerous and untamable Wild West. But the end of Harden's life wasn't quite as dramatic as the legend. In 1895, Harden was shot in the back of the head at a saloon in El Paso, Texas, while playing dice. The man who killed him was John Selman, a lawman with a personal vendetta. Harden, known for his quick temper and violent ways, made many enemies over the years, and Selman was one of them. So much for the idea that Harden only killed in self-defense. He met his end not in a standoff, but from a cowardly shot from behind. Tom Horn worked as a scout and hired a gun. He was known for his rifle skills and ability to track down outlaws. He built a reputation as a sharp, clever man who did the job without getting caught. Many believed he had killed several people, though not all the killings were proven. Horn's downfall came when he was accused of killing a young boy named Willie Nickel in 1901. There wasn't much evidence to prove he did it, but Horn had been bragging about the crime which led to his arrest. In 1903, he was sentenced to death and hanged. His death was a sad end for a man who made his living as a hired killer, and some still wonder if he was innocent. And there you have it. 21 legends of the Wild West who met their end in ways that were almost as legendary as their lives. And hey, if you've got a favorite Wild West figure who didn't make the list, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates.